So last week, I said this. Here's hoping that we don't go by another week with another incidental episode that is nice enough as a standalone entity, but has no real consequences for either the viewer or the Doctor Who canon in the long term. And was I right? Well, ultimately, yes, I think I was. I've already made it very clear that whilst I liked Empress of Mars last week, it wasn't too groundbreaking, radical, or exciting, save for that Alpha Centauri cameo, which was just something else. For me, the Edict of Light falls very much into the same category. Last week's returning element was the Ice Warriors and, to a certain extent, Mark Gatiss. This week it was Rona Munro. Now, even though at the time that this news was announced, I, like many other fans, was intrigued, in hindsight it seems almost inconsequential that the 10th episode of Series 10 was written by a writer who had only previously written for the classic series. Sure, it's a nice enough achievement, and definitely marks Munro out from other new series writers, but beyond that, what else has the Edict of Light got to say for itself? I think that's my main issue with this week's episode. In my eyes, it did just turn out to be another filler-style story. Furthermore, many of the themes and ideas brought up in this one were also explored in Empress of Mars. Most notably, once again we have a Doctor Who story that boils down to that fundamental sit-down-and-talk negotiation and debate that I discussed heavily last week. And ultimately, just like last week, the episode ends with two former enemies, two former sides, united as one, off to defend themselves from something else. I'm not going to be harsh though, because whilst that is slightly irritating for the regular viewers, for the fans, it will have gone straight over casual viewers' heads for the most part. But at the same time, it is a shame that a pair of such similar episodes couldn't have been scheduled a bit further apart in the run. I suppose the real problem is the Monk trilogy, slap bang in the middle of the series, dictating how other stories can fit in. If it's not Bill experiencing something for the first time, the future, the past, moving house, going into space, it has to be before the Monk trilogy, otherwise your story is stuck in the second half of the series. But enough negativity and chit-chat. I will acknowledge that the Edict of Light got a lot of things right. The extensive use of location and sets gave this episode a very satisfying overall aesthetic. It was all quite atmospheric, and of course the soundtrack naturally helps contribute to this. Probably one of Murray Gold's finest this series. Munro also wrote some fantastic dialogue for our three leads. The Doctor with his Malcolm Tucker-esque outbursts, also reminiscent of his war speech and other 12th Doctor moments at times. A bit more for Bill to do independently than we've seen her do in the past, which is nice. Plus a nice enough moment looking at fluidity of gender and sexuality, a kind of more modern concept explored in a historical context, which is nice. And then Nardole, who really did get some cracking one-liners. At present, we don't know whether Matt Lucas's lovable bubble hat wearing character will be staying on, will be surviving when Capaldi goes, or even past the end of this series into Christmas. I suppose the same applies to Bill as well. So I'll say again that I've really enjoyed his contribution to the series, to the traditional Doctor-companion dynamic. As I've said in the past, Nardole kind of shakes things up slightly, adding a new dimension to that dynamic that we've never really seen much of before, that kind of light comic relief that there aren't too many examples of in Doctor Who in previous episodes and previous series. Particularly this week, I found his antics with the Pictish cult very entertaining. Although you would have thought that in those 2 days when he was away from the Doctor, that he might try and do a runner back to the TARDIS or the Vault. But hey, I suppose he was just really enjoying himself and forgot all about his previous life as the Doctor's valet. Now onto the monster. Well, firstly, what was it called? Just the Eater of Light? Is that how we refer to it now? But moving on, yeah, I suppose it was alright. The CGI certainly wasn't as bad as I was expecting after reading a few pre-broadcast reviews. I'd kind of not got my hopes too high, but bar one shot of it running into the cairn when Nardole was outside, it was just about bearable. It was a good concept overall, but a bit too underdeveloped for my liking. Munro could have made more of a thing out of exactly how this creature reacts to light, to darkness, how it benefits it or doesn't benefit it and damages it, because that would have made the ending a bit more convincing. Because, well, at the end, the climax of the story, Was it overwhelmed by light or darkness? I still don't really understand how that all worked. More development of that concept to the itty gritty details would have helped things seem a bit more logical, I think, and convincing. In hindsight, I also can't help but think that perhaps the Eater of Light, that singular, might have been a better title. Whilst there were plural Eaters on the other side of the portal, we don't get to see much of them at all, really. A stronger focus on the one creature, not just in the title, but also throughout the script, I think, could potentially have made it a bit more intimidating. And speaking of that portal, when at any point was there a reference to it leading to the end of the world, as the synopsis said? No, there was nothing at all, so the synopsis lied. Well, you know, what were they thinking with that? What was up with that? It didn't lead to the end of the world at all, it just led to Eater of Lightland. So that's pretty much it, really, for this week. To sum up, I found the Eaters of Light a bit of a mixed bag, if you hadn't worked that one out already. Like a couple of other Series 10 episodes, like Knock Knock, a bit like last week's Empress of Mars, it was very enjoyable as a standalone adventure, definitely. A solid slice of pure Doctor Who. But beyond that face value, the plot was ever so slightly insecure and wishy-washy. And whilst there were some interesting issues and ideas worked into the script, I can't help but notice the thematic similarities to last week's episode. That said, I don't think that these minor criticisms affect my enjoyment of this story too much. For what it wasn't bad by any means. But never mind that, because the finale is just around the corner. I think, like many fans, I was overwhelmed by the Next Time trailer, but also intrigued as to how it all fits in with what we already know about World Enough and Time. Certainly to me, it's not quite as I'd imagined it, with the stuff about the role reversal for the Doctor and Missy, I suppose, with Missy being good, the test of her goodness, and obviously the Doctor giving her a chance and kind of falling for that. If it's a trap, if it's a betrayal, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see how that works out. It'll also be interesting to see how the Mondasian Cybermen and John Simm's Saxon Master fit into the equation as well. And I do have a slight worry about how that all fits in, how it works. I'm really hoping Moffat didn't just think, okay, there's a finale, what can we have? Missy, the Master, the Mondasian Cybermen, just like a tick list like that for Peter Capaldi's last ever finale to the Doctor. I'm hoping it wasn't quite so formulaic, and everything is worked in together and it makes sense, and it's logical, but I have faith in Stephen Moffat that will be the case. But then there shouldn't be, because it's episode 11, the penultimate episode of the series. Presumably there's going to be a cliffhanger, and plenty more shocks and surprises beyond what we already know. And I'm sure there is a great deal of stuff that we don't know, even for those that have scoured the web for spoilers, set reports, articles, details, absolutely anything. But yeah, certainly I, for one, cannot wait for answers. It looks set to be a really kind of climactic, infernal, thrilling finale. I hope that a lot of stuff is going to go down, and yeah, it looks great. Peter Capaldi's, the 12th Doctor's last ever finale as the Doctor, and I suppose now also as well, we're kind of into that last run of 3 episodes, because presumably Christmas is going to fit into it as well, somehow. Yeah, and it's exciting. Sad at the same time, of course, but exciting to think that now it's the home straight for the 12th Doctor. He is set to regenerate very, very soon now, and yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all those kind of events run, how it all plays out in motion and the rest of it, and just to see what happens for him and for his character. So that does it for another Series 10 review. I really hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please like the video, subscribe if you haven't already, and comment below your thoughts on the Eaters of Light. Had we but World Enough and Time, this coyness lady were no crime, we would sit down and think which way to walk, and pass our long love's day. But I'm afraid that's tough, because I'm out of time for this week, so I'll see you next week for my review of World Enough and Time.